My name is Casey, and I was 27 when I woke up in a hospital bed with no memory of how I got there. All I remembered was the sharp pain of a screwdriver piercing my shoulder and the sound of my parents laughing as I bled onto my bedroom floor. Family is supposed to protect you, not betray you. That night changed everything for me, and the justice that followed shocked everyone, including myself. Facing betrayal from your own family is the hardest pain to overcome. If you have ever felt alone while surrounded by relatives who should have protected you, share your experience in the comments below. And please subscribe to join our healing journey together as we explore how to rebuild from family trauma. I grew up in a small town just outside of Philadelphia with my mom, Diane. My biological father left when I was 3, and it was just the two of us for a long time. We were close, almost like best friends. She would braid my hair before school and leave little notes in my lunchbox. I cherish those memories because they felt like remnants of a different life now, one where my mother actually loved me. Everything changed when I was 15. Mom met Frank at her office Christmas party. He was charming, successful, and most importantly, to her stable. After years of struggling as a single mother, Diane saw Frank as her salvation. Within 6 months, they were married, and Frank moved into our small, 2-bedroom house with his son Dominic, who was 17 at the time. From the beginning, Dominic made it clear he had no interest in having a sister. He would ignore me at dinner, take my things without asking, and constantly complain to his father that I was invading their space. Frank would smile indulgently and tell him to be patient, that we were all adjusting. It was during my sophomore year of high school that my health began deteriorating. It started with extreme fatigue that sleep couldn't fix, followed by joint pain that made getting through gym class an exercise in silent suffering. I began missing school days, something that had never happened before. After 3 months, 5 doctor appointments, and countless blood tests, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition that attacked my connective tissue. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Johnson, explained that the disease was rare and that there would be good days and bad days. She prescribed medication and suggested lifestyle adjustments. My mother seemed concerned at first. She drove me to appointments and learned about my condition. But as weeks turned into months, her attitude shifted. The medical bills piled up, and Frank began making comments. "Are you sure she really needs all these medications?" he would ask my mom when they thought I was asleep. "Teenagers are always tired. Maybe she just needs to push through it." Slowly, my mother began to echo his sentiments. "Casey, you need to try harder. Everyone has aches and pains. You can't let this define you." By the time I turned 18, my mother had transformed from my advocate into someone who viewed my illness as an inconvenience. Frank was more direct in his skepticism. "When I was your age," he would say, "over dinner I worked 2 jobs and still played varsity football. It's all about mental toughness." Dominic, now 19, and taking classes at the local community college, was the worst. He would mimic me when I winced in pain, making dramatic groaning sounds when I took my medication. "The princess needs her special pills again," he would announce to the house. "Everyone bow down and give her attention." I graduated high school and got a job at the local library. The work was physically manageable on most days, and I loved being surrounded by books. My plan was to save enough money to move out and possibly take online college courses. I carefully tracked my expenses and health costs, putting aside whatever I could. The only person who truly understood what I was going through was my friend Alice. We had known each other since elementary school, and she never questioned the reality of my pain. She would bring me books from the bookstore where she worked when I was too sick to leave the house. Sometimes she would drive me to appointments when my mother claimed to be too busy. "You deserve better," Casey Alice would tell me. "They treat you like you're making this up." I tried to hold on to hope that my family situation would improve, that one day my mother would snap out of whatever spell Frank had cast on her and become my protector again. I wanted to believe that Frank would eventually see that my condition was real, or that Dominic would mature beyond his petty resentment. But as my 25th birthday approached, I was still living at home, still working at the library, still being gaslit about my health, and still trying to save enough money to escape. The dream of freedom seemed to be slipping further away with each passing month. Dr. Johnson remained my steadfast ally. During one particularly difficult appointment, after a severe flare-up, she held my hand and said something I will never forget. "Casey, your condition is real. Your pain is real. And the way your family is treating you is not okay. It's medical neglect, and it's making your condition worse." I nodded, tears streaming down my face, as someone in authority finally validated what I had been feeling for years. "Have you considered moving out? Getting away from that environment might actually improve your symptoms," she suggested. "I'm trying," I replied. "But between the medical costs and low pay at the library, I can barely save anything." She squeezed my hand and promised to help me find resources. As I left her office that day, I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe there was a way out after all. By the time I turned 26, whatever maternal instinct my mother once possessed had completely disappeared. When I would wake up unable to move from pain, she would roll her eyes and mutter about me needing to get it together. Not once in the past 3 years had she accompanied me to a doctor's appointment. Frank took things a step further. During dinner one evening, he casually mentioned that he had removed me from his health insurance plan. "You're an adult now, Casey. It's time you took responsibility for your own medical costs," he said between bites of pot roast. "But you promised when I stayed after high school that I could remain on your insurance until I found something with benefits." I protested, panic rising in my chest as I calculated what this would mean for my medication costs. "Plans change," he replied dismissively. "Dominic needs help with his tuition this semester." My mother said nothing, just kept eating as if the conversation wasn't happening. Her silence hurt more than Frank's words. That night, I called every insurance company I could find, only to discover that my monthly premiums would be more than half my library salary. I would have to choose between medication and rent if I moved out. The situation with Dominic grew increasingly hostile. He was now 28, still living at home while working at his father's insurance company. His resentment toward me seemed to intensify with each passing month. It started with small things, like accidentally throwing away my mail or eating food I had specifically labeled in the refrigerator. Then one day, I noticed my prescription bottle was lighter than it should have been. I counted the pills 3 times to be sure. 10 were missing. When I confronted Dominic, he laughed in my face. "Maybe you took them and forgot. Isn't memory loss one of your many supposed symptoms?" The next week, I came home to find a voicemail from Dr. Johnson's office asking why I had called to cancel my appointment. I hadn't. Someone else had. I began keeping a detailed log of these incidents, documenting dates, times, and exactly what had occurred. I installed a small lockbox in my closet for my medication and important documents. Alice suggested I set up a camera in my room, but the thought of being caught with it terrified me. Frank had made it clear that since I lived in his house, I had no right to privacy. My health continued to decline. Without consistent access to my medication, my flare-ups became more frequent and severe. I would drag myself to work, propping my body up at the circulation desk, smiling through pain that felt like ground glass in my joints. Mrs. Peterson, the head librarian, who had always been kind to me, called me into her office one rainy Tuesday afternoon. "Casey, I value your work ethic and your contribution to our team," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "But your absences are affecting our ability to serve the community. I've been as flexible as I can, but I need someone I can count on." I nodded, tears welling up as I realized what was coming. "I'm sorry, but I have to let you go. I can provide a reference for future positions that might better accommodate your health needs." That night, I sat in my car in the library parking lot for 2 hours, unable to face going home and telling my family I had lost my job. When I finally did, their reactions were exactly as I expected. "Well, they put up with it longer than most places would," Frank commented. "Maybe this is the wake-up call you need," my mother added. "You can't expect employers to work around your constant issues." Dominic smirked from the couch. "I know a guy who sells disability placards, if you want to really commit to the whole invalid thing." The next morning, I called Alice in tears. "I don't know what to do. I have no job, no health insurance, and my family thinks I'm faking everything." "Move in with me," she said without hesitation. "My roommate just moved out, and I need someone to split the rent anyway." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. But when I started looking into what I would need for the rental application, I hit another roadblock. I had no recent pay stubs, no rental history, and my savings had dwindled to less than $1,000 after paying for medications out of pocket. Worse still, I discovered that rumors about me had spread through our small town. Dominic had been telling people I was addicted to pain medication and that I'd been fired for stealing from the library. Former acquaintances would cross the street to avoid talking to me. Only Alice remained steadfast. In desperation, I tried one last time to reach my mother. I waited until Frank and Dominic were out watching a football game, and I sat her down at the kitchen table. "Mom," I said, my voice breaking, "do you remember when I was little and you would check for monsters under my bed? You promised you would always protect me." She stared at her coffee mug, refusing to meet my eyes. "I need you to protect me now. This isn't a safe place for me anymore. Dominic is tampering with my medication. Frank cut my insurance. I'm getting sicker, and no one believes me." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the mother I once knew. But then she stood up. "You need to stop blaming everyone else for your problems, Casey. Frank has given you a roof over your head for years. Dominic is building a career while you make excuses. I'm tired of the drama." She walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone at the table. That night, I heard her telling Frank that I was acting out again, and he responded by threatening that if I didn't straighten up, he would be forced to ask me to leave. The walls were closing in. I had no job, no support system beyond Alice, deteriorating health, and a family that had become my worst enemy. I began sleeping with my bedroom door locked, and a chair propped under the handle, jumping at every sound in the night. On Thursday, March 10th, exactly 1 week after losing my job at the library, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The small lockbox where I kept my emergency fund, about $800 in cash that I had been saving for first and last month's rent somewhere, was slightly ajar. I rushed to open it already, knowing what I would find. The money was gone, all of it. I knew immediately who had taken it. Dominic had been complaining about needing to repair his car, and suddenly yesterday he had announced at dinner that his car was fixed. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Despite every instinct telling me to stay quiet to not rock the boat, I was desperate. That money represented my only chance at escape. I waited until dinner that night, when everyone was present. "I need to discuss something important," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Someone took money from my room. $800 that I've been saving." Frank barely looked up from his plate. Are you sure you didn't spend it and forget? You've been pretty scattered lately. No, I insisted. It was in my lockbox for emergencies, and now it's gone. My mother sighed dramatically. Casey, not this again. First the medications, then the canceled appointments. Now, missing money. There's always something. Dominic was oddly quiet, concentrating on cutting his steak into perfectly even pieces. His silence confirmed my suspicion. Dominic, I said directly, did you take my money to fix your car? His head snapped up, eyes flashing with anger. Are you seriously accusing me of stealing in front of my dad? Frank put down his fork with a clatter. That's enough, Casey. Dominic works hard for his money, unlike some people at this table. I won't have you making wild accusations without proof. But my money is gone, and suddenly his car is fixed. I'm not making this up. That's it, Frank stood up his chair, scraping against the floor. I've had it with your paranoia and your constant need to create drama. Dominic is my son, and he's not a thief. If you can't live peacefully in this house, maybe it's time you found somewhere else to stay. My mother remained silent, staring down at her plate. Not once did she look at me. After dinner, I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me. Within minutes, there was a soft knock. For a moment, I hoped it might be my mother coming to apologize, or at least hear me out. Instead, when I cracked open the door, Dominic stood there with a smirk that made my skin crawl. You really shouldn't have done that, he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Making accusations like that can be dangerous. Are you threatening me? I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I'm just saying you're on thin ice around here. Dad's had it with your victim act. If something were to happen to you, who do you think they'd believe, the hard-working son or the crazy daughter who makes up illnesses for attention? I slammed the door in his face and slid to the floor, heart pounding. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and recorded a voice memo recounting every word of the conversation while it was fresh. I sent the recording to Alice with a text, just in case something happens. Dominic's threat left me rattled. I spent an hour researching domestic violence hotlines, finally working up the courage to call one. The woman on the other end was kind, but ultimately not very helpful. Since Dominic hadn't physically harmed me yet, and I was an adult, there wasn't much they could do. She suggested documenting everything and making a plan to leave safely. That evening, I went to take my evening dose of medication and noticed the pills looked slightly different. The color was a shade lighter than usual. I examined them closely under my desk lamp and noticed tiny inconsistencies in the imprint. With growing horror, I realized they had been replaced with something else. I didn't know what they were, but they weren't my prescription. My hands shook as I flushed them down the toilet. Without my medication, I knew a flare-up was inevitable, but that was better than taking unknown pills that Dominic had likely tampered with. I called Dr. Johnson's personal number, which she had given me for emergencies. Casey, this is beyond concerning, she said, after I explained the situation. What you're describing is abuse and medical neglect. I'm worried for your safety. What should I do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as I huddled in my closet to avoid being overheard. You need to get out of that house as soon as possible. The stress alone is exacerbating your condition, not to mention the medication tampering. Do you have somewhere safe to go? I thought of Alice's offer. Yes, a friend said I could stay with her. Then go, Casey. As your doctor, I'm telling you, this environment is dangerous for your health. As someone who cares about you, I'm worried about what might happen if you stay. After hanging up, I texted Alice. Can I still take you up on your offer? Things are worse. I need to get out. Her response was immediate. Of course. Can you come this weekend? I'll help you move. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. I had a plan, just 2 more days in this house, and then I could escape. I began mentally cataloging what I would take with me, what could be packed discreetly without alerting my family. Just essential clothes, important documents, and medications. Everything else could be replaced. As I lay in bed that night, muscles aching from the stress and the lack of proper medication, I allowed myself to imagine a new life. One where I wasn't constantly doubted and belittled. One where I could focus on healing rather than survival. Just 2 more days, I told myself. Just 2 more days. Friday passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. I worked methodically, packing a small bag whenever the house was empty and hiding it in the back of my closet. I gathered my birth certificate, social security card, and medical records, securing them in a folder that I kept with me at all times. I called Alice during her lunch break to finalize our plans. She would come with her car on Saturday afternoon while Frank was at his golf game and Dominic was at a friend's watching a basketball tournament. By the time evening arrived, I felt a strange mix of terror and hope. Just 1 more night in this house, I kept reminding myself. Just 12 more hours. Dinner was unusually quiet. Frank and my mother discussed their weekend plans while Dominic stared at his phone. I kept my head down, responding with minimal answers when spoken to directly. I didn't want to draw attention to myself or give any indication that something was different. After dinner, I told everyone I wasn't feeling well and was going to bed early. My mother barely nodded in acknowledgement. In my room, I did one final inventory of what I would take with me tomorrow. My body ached with the beginnings of a flare, up the inevitable result of missing several doses of my medication. I took 2 over-the-counter pain relievers, knowing they would barely touch the pain, but hoping they might help me sleep. I must have dozed off because I woke with a start at 2:30 in the morning. Something had pulled me from sleep, a noise, or perhaps just my body's internal warning system. I lay still in the darkness, listening. The house was quiet, but I had the distinct feeling that something was wrong. I reached for my phone on the nightstand to check the time. 2:33 a.m. As I set it back down, I heard it. A soft creak in the hallway outside my door, the sound of weight being placed carefully on the old floorboards that I had learned to avoid. Someone was trying to be quiet. Someone was outside my door. My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had locked the door before going to bed, but the lock was flimsy, the kind you could open with a firm push or a credit card. I slid out of bed as silently as possible and grabbed the chair from my desk, wedging it under the doorknob the way I had been doing for weeks. Just as I stepped back, there was a soft click, the sound of the lock being manipulated. Then pressure against the door, gentle at first, then harder. The chair held. Casey Dominic's voice came through the door, low and controlled. "Open up! I know what you're planning." I remained frozen in place, not daring to breathe. "I saw your text messages on the cloud backup. You think you're so smart, but you forgot we share a family account." My blood ran cold. I had completely forgotten about the shared cloud storage Frank had set up years ago, insisting it would save money if we all used the same account. "Casey, open the door, or I'm going to wake up Dad." My mind raced. If Frank got involved, he would side with Dominic. He always did. And if they discovered I was planning to leave, they might prevent me from going tomorrow. This was my only chance. Reluctantly, I removed the chair. As soon as the doorknob was free, the door swung open. Dominic stood in the dimly lit doorway, still dressed in the clothes he had worn at dinner. His eyes were wide and alert. He wasn't here because he had just discovered my plans. He had been waiting, biding his time, until everyone was asleep. He pushed past me into the room, closing the door behind him. In his right hand, I noticed he was holding something, a screwdriver from Frank's toolbox in the garage. "What are you doing?" I whispered, backing away until I felt the edge of my bed against the backs of my knees. "You ungrateful little snake," he hissed. "After everything my dad has done for you and your pathetic mother, this is how you repay him, by sneaking away in the middle of the night." "I'm 27 years old, Dominic. I have every right to move out." "Not like this. Not by lying and turning people against us. I saw your text to Alice talking about how terrible we are, how we're abusing you." His voice rose slightly before he caught himself and lowered it again. "You're going to destroy my dad's reputation with your lies." "I'm not lying. You stole my money. You tampered with my medication. You threatened me." He took a step closer, the screwdriver gripped tightly in his hand. "No one will believe you. No one ever does. You're the girl who cries wolf, the attention seeker with the mysterious disease that only acts up when you want sympathy." I glanced at my phone on the nightstand, calculating whether I could reach it before he stopped me. As if reading my thoughts, Dominic lunged forward and grabbed it. "Give that back," I demanded, reaching for it. What happened next occurred so quickly that my brain could barely process it. As I reached for my phone, Dominic raised his other hand, the one holding the screwdriver. I saw a flash of metal in the dim light, and then felt an explosion of pain in my left shoulder. The screwdriver had punctured my skin, driving deep into the muscle. I screamed a sound torn from the deepest part of me, filled with shock and agony. Dominic looked almost as surprised as I was. For a split second, he just stared at the screwdriver protruding from my shoulder, his face a mask of shock. Then, as footsteps thundered down the hallway, he stepped back. The door burst open, and Frank appeared, followed closely by my mother. They took in the scene, their eyes moving from me to Dominic to the screwdriver, still embedded in my shoulder. Blood was soaking through my pajama top, spreading in a dark stain. "What the hell is going on here?" Frank demanded. Before I could speak, Dominic jumped in. "She attacked me, Dad. I came to talk to her about something, and she went crazy. I was just defending myself." I gasped in pain and disbelief. "That's not true. He came into my room with a screwdriver and stabbed me." Frank looked between us, his face unreadable. Then he turned to my mother. "Call an ambulance." For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. They were going to help me. But then my mother laughed, a short, dismissive sound that cut through me more painfully than the screwdriver. "Oh, please. It's barely a scratch. She's being dramatic as usual." I looked down at my shoulder in disbelief. The screwdriver was still embedded there, and blood was now dripping onto the carpet. "Are you serious? I'm bleeding. He stabbed me." Frank stepped closer, examining the wound with clinical detachment. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. "Casey, if you wanted attention, there are better ways. This is ridiculous. Pull that thing out and put a Band-Aid on it. You're making a mess of the carpet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had a screwdriver stuck in my body, and they were laughing. "Get out," I whispered, shock, giving way to a cold, clear rage. "Get out of my room, all of you." Surprisingly, they complied, still chuckling among themselves as they left. As soon as the door closed, I collapsed onto the bed, my entire body shaking. I needed help. Real help. With my right hand, I fumbled for my phone, which Dominic had dropped on the floor during the struggle. My vision was starting to blur at the edges, but I managed to text Alice. "Emergency. Dominic stabbed me. Parents won't help. Bleeding badly. Please call 911. I tried to apply pressure around the wound, but the pain was overwhelming. The room began to spin, and dark spots danced in my vision. I thought I heard my phone chime with a response, but I couldn't focus enough to read it. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the warm, sticky feeling of blood pooling beneath me on the bedsheets and the distant wail of sirens. I woke to the rhythmic beeping of hospital machines and the sterile smell of disinfectant. For a moment, I couldn't remember how I had gotten there or why my shoulder felt like it was on fire. Then it all came rushing back: Dominic, the screwdriver, the blood, my parents laughing. I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through my left side. "Easy there," a gentle voice said. Alice was sitting beside my bed, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she had been there for hours. "You lost a lot of blood. The doctor said you need to stay still." "What happened? How did I get here?" My voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "I called 911 after I got your text. I drove to your house and was there when the ambulance arrived." Her voice hardened. "Your parents tried to tell the paramedics it was just a misunderstanding, that you had injured yourself for attention. But the wound was obviously not self-inflicted, and you were unconscious from blood loss. The police took statements from everyone." I closed my eyes, trying to process this information. "Dominic. They arrested him on the spot. Your parents were furious, kept saying it was all a mistake. Frank even tried to prevent the paramedics from taking you, saying he was going to drive you himself. A doctor came in, then a tall woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as Dr. Rivera. She explained that the screwdriver had missed major arteries, but had penetrated deep into the muscle tissue of my shoulder. I would need physical therapy and would likely have permanent nerve damage, resulting in reduced sensation and mobility in my left arm. While she was examining me, there was a knock at the door. A woman in a sharp suit entered, introducing herself as Sarah Martinez, an assistant district attorney. "Miss Anderson, I understand this is a difficult time," she said, her voice professional but compassionate. "But I need to ask you some questions about what happened last night. We're pursuing felony assault charges against Dominic Wilson." Over the next hour, I recounted everything: the years of gaslighting about my medical condition, the theft of my money, the medication tampering, and finally the attack itself. Alice provided additional context, showing the prosecutor the voice memos and texts I had sent her documenting Dominic's threats. "This is very disturbing," Sarah said when I finished. "What you're describing goes beyond a single incident of assault. This appears to be a pattern of abuse and medical neglect." Dr. Johnson arrived, while Sarah was still there, having been notified of my hospitalization. She brought my complete medical records and confirmed my autoimmune diagnosis to both the hospital staff and the prosecutor. "I've been concerned about Casey's home situation for years," she told Sarah. "I've documented multiple instances where her treatment was interrupted or compromised, likely due to tampering. The physical and emotional stress of her home environment has significantly worsened her condition." As they talked, I felt a strange sense of validation washing over me. After years of being told I was imagining things, of being dismissed and disbelieved, professionals were confirming that what happened to me was real and wrong. The next few days passed in a blur of medical tests, police interviews, and legal discussions. I learned that Dominic had been released on bail, but was under a restraining order prohibiting him from coming near me. Frank had hired an expensive attorney for him, who was already working to characterize the incident as a misunderstanding between siblings. A social worker visited me in the hospital, helping me apply for emergency housing assistance and temporary disability benefits. Alice brought me clothes and toiletries, assuring me that her offer to take me in still stood once I was discharged. 5 days after the attack, as I was preparing to leave the hospital, 2 police officers arrived with a warrant to search the Wilson home, based on information I had provided about stolen medication and financial abuse. They found my missing medication in Dominic's room, along with my emergency fund money and a notebook where he had apparently been practicing how to forge my signature. The investigation expanded. The police discovered a pattern of suspicious activities, canceled medical appointments, rerouted mail, and even evidence that Dominic had been impersonating me online to make posts that suggested I was mentally unstable. Frank and my mother remained steadfast in their support of Dominic, claiming I had manipulated evidence and was framing him out of jealousy. My mother went so far as to tell investigators that I had a history of self-harm and had likely stabbed myself to get attention. Dr. Johnson's records thoroughly disproved these claims. 2 weeks after the attack, Sarah called to inform me that the grand jury had returned indictments against Dominic for assault with a deadly weapon, theft, fraud, and elder abuse. The last charge, stemming from the fact that my medical condition qualified me for certain vulnerable adult protections under state law. "They're offering a plea deal," Sarah explained, "but I don't recommend taking it. The evidence against him is strong, and I believe we can secure a conviction at trial that would result in significant jail time." I hesitated, torn between wanting this to be over and needing justice. "Will I have to testify? Face him in court?" "Yes," she admitted, "but we'll prepare you thoroughly, and you'll have a support system there. This isn't just about punishment, Casey. It's about setting a precedent that what happened to you is not acceptable and ensuring it doesn't happen to you or anyone else again." After a long pause, I made my decision. "I'll testify. I've been silent too long already." The trial was scheduled for early June, nearly 3 months after the attack. In the intervening time, I had moved in with Alice, started intensive physical therapy for my shoulder, and begun seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma. For the first time in years, I had consistent medical care and was taking my medication as prescribed. The difference in my physical health was remarkable, confirming what Dr. Johnson had long suspected. The stress and medical neglect at home had been significantly exacerbating my symptoms. As the trial date approached, my anxiety increased. Despite reassurances from Sarah and my support team, the thought of facing Dominic, Frank, and my mother in court terrified me. My nightmares featured their laughing faces as I bled onto my bedroom floor. The morning of the trial arrived with a heavy sense of dread. Alice drove me to the courthouse where we met Sarah. She briefed me one final time on what to expect. "Remember, just tell the truth. Answer the questions directly, and if you don't know something, say so. The defense attorney will try to rattle you, but I'll object to anything inappropriate." The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, but still intimidating with its dark wood panels and formal atmosphere. As I was led to the witness stand, I caught a glimpse of Dominic sitting at the defense table. He was wearing a suit I had never seen before and looked nothing like the angry man who had driven a screwdriver into my shoulder. Beside him sat a distinguished-looking older attorney with a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Frank and my mother were sitting directly behind Dominic in the first row of spectators. My mother caught my eye for a brief moment before looking away, her face unreadable. The prosecutor opened with a clear, concise overview of the case, presenting me not just as a victim of a single violent attack, but as someone who had endured years of escalating abuse and neglect. "The evidence will show," Sarah concluded, "that the defendant deliberately and with malice aforethought assaulted the victim with a deadly weapon, culminating years of psychological abuse, theft, and medical neglect." Dominic's attorney, Mr. Lawrence, painted a very different picture in his opening statement. According to him, I was a troubled young woman with a history of manipulation and attention-seeking behavior, who had attacked Dominic in a fit of rage, forcing him to defend himself. The evidence will show, he said, mirroring Sarah's phrasing, that Miss Anderson has a long history of fabricating or exaggerating medical symptoms for attention and financial gain, and that my client was the real victim in this unfortunate family dispute. I felt physically ill listening to these lies. Sarah had warned me this would happen, but the reality of hearing myself described this way in a public courtroom was still shocking. Frank was the first witness called by the defense. Under oath, he described me as a manipulative and unstable person who had been a burden on the family for years. He claimed I had invented or exaggerated my medical condition to avoid work and responsibility, and that I had attacked Dominic when he confronted me about stealing money from him, not the other way around. "Did you witness the alleged assault?" Mr. Lawrence asked. "No, but I heard the commotion and came running. Casey had clearly attacked Dominic, and in the struggle she was accidentally injured." "And what was your response when you saw her injury?" Frank had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "Well, it didn't look serious. Casey has a tendency to be dramatic about minor injuries. We didn't realize until later that the wound was as deep as it was." My mother's testimony followed similar lines. She described a daughter she barely recognized, painting me as manipulative, lazy, and prone to lying for attention. When asked about her reaction to seeing me bleeding with a screwdriver in my shoulder, she admitted that she had not taken it seriously. Casey had been threatening to move out, saying all sorts of wild things about how we were abusing her. When I saw her with the screwdriver, I assumed it was another one of her stunts to get attention and sympathy. I never thought she would go that far. Sarah's cross-examination was meticulous. She presented medical records from my childhood showing I had been a healthy, active child until the onset of my autoimmune disease at age 16. She introduced school records demonstrating my excellent attendance and academic performance before my illness, directly contradicting the claim that I was lazy or seeking to avoid responsibilities. "Mrs. Wilson," Sarah asked my mother, "are you aware that tampering with someone's medication, as happened to your daughter, is a felony?" "Objection assumes facts, not in evidence," Mr. Lawrence interjected. "Sustained," the judge ruled. Sarah rephrased. "Mrs. Wilson, when you saw your daughter unconscious and bleeding on her bed, why didn't you call for medical assistance?" My mother shifted uncomfortably. "As I said, I didn't think it was serious. Casey has a history of exaggerating. So serious that the emergency room doctor testified she could have died from blood loss if help hadn't arrived when it did." "Objection argumentative," Mr. Lawrence called out. "Sustained," rephrased counselor. "Did any medical professional ever tell you that your daughter was fabricating or exaggerating her autoimmune condition?" "No, but—" "A simple yes or no will suffice, Mrs. Wilson. Did any doctor ever tell you Casey was faking her illness?" "No." When it was my turn to testify, I was trembling so badly I could barely make it to the witness stand. But once I began speaking, a strange calm came over me. For years I had been silenced, dismissed, and disbelieved. Now finally, I had a forum where I would be heard, where I was legally protected from interruption and dismissal. I described the years of gaslighting about my medical condition, the theft of my money, the medication tampering, and finally the attack itself. I explained how I had been planning to move out, and how Dominic had discovered my plans through the shared cloud account. I detailed waking up to find him in my room with a screwdriver, the argument that followed, and the moment he drove the tool into my shoulder. "And what happened after you were injured?" Sarah asked. I screamed, and my parents came running. They saw the screwdriver in my shoulder and the blood, but they laughed. They actually laughed. My mother said I was being dramatic, and Frank told me to pull it out and put a Band-Aid on it. My voice broke as I recalled the casual cruelty of that moment. Mr. Lawrence's cross-examination was aggressive, attempting to portray me as unstable and vindictive. Isn't it true, Miss Anderson, that you have a history of seeking attention through claims of illness? No, I replied firmly. I have a documented autoimmune condition diagnosed by multiple specialists. And isn't it true that you attacked my client and he acted in self-defense? No. He came into my room in the middle of the night with a screwdriver and stabbed me when I tried to get my phone back from him. Isn't it convenient that there were no witnesses to this alleged attack? There were no witnesses because your client deliberately waited until everyone was asleep to confront me. But there is physical evidence. The angle of the wound shows it couldn't have been self-inflicted, and his fingerprints were on the screwdriver. Dr. Johnson's testimony was particularly damning for the defense. She provided a detailed account of my medical history confirming the autoimmune diagnosis and explaining how the symptoms could vary in severity but were absolutely real. In my professional opinion, she stated, Casey has been subjected to medical neglect that significantly worsened her condition. The pattern of missed appointments, medication, inconsistencies, and the extreme stress of her home environment created a dangerous situation for her health. Alice testified about the texts and voice memos I had sent her documenting Dominic's threats, the photos she had taken of my ransacked room after I had reported money missing, and most critically, the SOS message I had sent the night of the attack, and what she found when she arrived at the house with the police and paramedics. The most dramatic moment of the trial came during Dominic's testimony. Initially, he stuck to the story that I had attacked him and he had acted in self-defense. But under Sarah's cross-examination, his composure began to crack. Mr. Wilson, Sarah began. You testified that Casey attacked you, forcing you to defend yourself. Yet the medical examiner stated the wound angle was consistent with a downward stabbing motion from someone standing over the victim, not a defensive movement. How do you explain that discrepancy? She came at me and I reacted, he insisted. With a screwdriver that you happened to bring to her bedroom at 3 a.m. I was using it earlier to fix something. At 3 a.m., what were you fixing in the middle of the night that required a screwdriver? Dominic's face flushed with anger. Look, she was planning to leave and spread lies about us. I just wanted to talk to her. With a screwdriver in your hand? That doesn't sound like someone who just wants to talk, Mr. Wilson. You don't understand. She was going to ruin everything. She was going to tell people we abused her, that we stole from her. And did you steal from her? Dominic's attorney jumped up. Objection. But Dominic was already answering, his voice rising. It wasn't stealing. My dad paid for everything in that house. That money was as much mine as hers. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Sarah pressed her advantage. So you did take her money. She didn't deserve it. She contributed nothing, just complained about her fake illness all the time while my dad worked to support her. And her medication. Did you tamper with that too? Mr. Lawrence was practically shouting now. Objection, Your Honor. My client is being badgered. But Dominic was beyond control. Years of resentment and entitlement pouring out of him. She didn't need those medications. She was faking it for attention. I was doing her a favor, trying to make her see she didn't need to pretend anymore. The courtroom fell silent. In his rage, Dominic had just confessed to exactly what he was accused of. His attorney looked stricken. Frank and my mother sat frozen in shock. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a verdict guilty on all counts. As the forewoman read the verdict, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I had been heard and believed. Judge Lewis, a stern older woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, addressed Dominic before sentencing. "Mr. Wilson, your actions reflect a disturbing pattern of deliberate cruelty toward a vulnerable family member. You not only assaulted Miss Anderson with a deadly weapon, but systematically undermined her health and well-being over an extended period. This court cannot ignore such calculated malice." She sentenced him to 8 years in prison, with eligibility for parole, after 5 years contingent upon completion of both anger management and empathy training programs. But the most powerful moment came when Judge Lewis turned her attention to Frank and my mother. "While you are not on trial today, the evidence presented makes it clear that you both failed in your most basic duty to protect a vulnerable member of your household. Your dismissal of Miss Present Anderson's documented medical condition and your response to seeing her seriously injured were frankly appalling. I am referring this case to Adult Protective Services for further investigation into medical neglect." The courtroom was utterly silent as she continued. "Miss Anderson, this court recognizes the courage it took for you to come forward. No one should have to fight so hard to be believed about their own lived experience. I hope that today's verdict brings you some measure of peace and vindication." As I left the courtroom that day, surrounded by Alice Dr. Johnson and the victim advocates who had supported me through the trial, I felt both exhausted and liberated. The truth had finally been told, heard, and officially acknowledged. Whatever happened next, I would face it as someone who had reclaimed her voice and her truth. 6 months after the trial, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. I was living in a small but sunny one-bedroom apartment that I shared with no one but a rescue cat named Luna. The apartment was on the first floor of a building, with an elevator accommodations that were helpful during my flare-ups. My shoulder had healed, as well as could be expected. I had regained most of my mobility through physical therapy, though certain movements still caused pain, and I had a patch of numbness that the doctors said would likely be permanent. The scar was still angry and red, but it was fading little by little each month. With Dr. Johnson's guidance, I had established a consistent treatment plan for my autoimmune condition. For the first time in years, I was taking the correct medications at the right times without interference or sabotage. The improvement in my symptoms was remarkable. I still had bad days, but they were fewer and further between, and I had developed strategies to manage them effectively. The criminal trial had been followed by a civil case, which resulted in a settlement that provided me with enough money to cover my medical expenses and supplement my income while I rebuilt my life. I had found part-time work at an independent bookstore owned by a woman who understood chronic illness because her sister had lupus. She allowed me flexible hours and the ability to work from home on my bad days. My therapist, Dr. Ramirez, had been invaluable in helping me process the trauma of both the attack and the years of gaslighting that preceded it. In one particularly breakthrough session, she helped me understand that I had been experiencing a form of domestic abuse called medical abuse, where a person's health condition is used against them as a means of control and manipulation. "What happened to you wasn't your fault, Casey," she reminded me often. "You didn't deserve it, you didn't cause it, and you couldn't have prevented it." Slowly, I was beginning to believe her. Alice remained my steadfast friend, though our relationship had evolved as I became more independent. We had weekly dinner dates where we talked about everything except my family drama, a boundary I had established to ensure that our friendship wasn't defined by my trauma. I had also joined a support group for survivors of family abuse. The first time I shared my story, I was terrified certain that these strangers would doubt me, just as my family had. Instead, I was met with understanding nods, supportive words, and similar stories. It was in this group that I began to truly understand I wasn't alone, that family betrayal was a wound many people carried, and that healing was possible. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as I was arranging a new display of mystery novels at the bookstore, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Casey, it's me." My mother's voice sent a jolt through me. We hadn't spoken since the trial 6 months earlier. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what happened, about what the judge said." She paused, and I could hear her take a deep breath. "I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I should have protected you. I should have believed you." I didn't respond immediately. The apology I had once desperately wanted now felt hollow, coming so late and after so much damage had been done. "Casey, are you still there?" "I'm here," I replied. "I just don't know what you expect me to say." "Nothing. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I recognize now how wrong I was. Frank and I have separated. I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand how I could have failed you so completely." A part of me wanted to lash out, to demand to know why it had taken a violent assault and a criminal trial for her to see what should have been obvious. Another part of me, the part that had been working with Dr. Ramirez on forgiveness as a means of personal liberation rather than absolution, for the offender recognized that her acknowledgement was a step, however small, and late. "Thank you for the apology," I said finally. "But I need you to understand that I'm not ready for a relationship with you. I might never be. I'm still healing from what happened." "I understand," she said softly. "I just want you to know that when and if you ever want to talk, I'll be here." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet stockroom of the bookstore, processing the conversation. 6 months ago, I would have given anything to hear my mother apologize and acknowledge what had happened. Now, I understood that while her apology was important, my healing couldn't depend on it. I had found my own path forward, built my own support system, and was learning to trust my own experience without requiring external validation. That evening, as I worked on an essay for a writing workshop I had joined, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I had begun writing about my experiences initially just for myself as a form of therapy, but increasingly with the thought that my story might help others in similar situations. The essay I was working on was about the concept of chosen family, the people who support and believe in you, not because of blood obligation, but because of genuine care and respect. Alice, Dr. Johnson, Sarah, the prosecutor, my support group members, my new boss, even Luna, the cat, who curled up next to me when I was having a bad pain day, as if she sensed my discomfort. These were the people who had demonstrated what true family should be. As I wrote, I realized something profound. The most important relationship I had rebuilt was with myself. For years, I had been taught to doubt my own perceptions, to question my own pain, to minimize my own needs. The greatest act of rebellion had been learning to trust myself again, to honor my experiences, and to advocate for my own well-being. The scars from what happened would always be with me, both the visible one on my shoulder and the invisible ones on my psyche. But scars were evidence of survival of the body and spirit's remarkable capacity to heal even after terrible wounds. They were a testament to my resilience, not my victimhood. That night, as I sat by my window, watching the rainfall, Luna purring softly beside me, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The journey of healing wasn't linear, and I still had difficult days, but I was moving forward on my own terms, reclaiming my story one day at a time. The screwdriver that was meant to silence me had instead become the catalyst for finding my voice. In the end, that was the most powerful verdict of all. Have you ever had to rebuild trust in yourself after others made you doubt your own reality? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you found value in my journey, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to know they're not alone. Thank you for listening, and remember, healing is not about erasing the past, but about creating a future where those wounds no longer define you.